So let's talk about this. And for those who either don't remember or are new to the show, over the past couple of months, I guess, we've been looking at each position of the Bengals, the needs going into the 27 offseason and the performance in 2016 of the players at the position. On one hand, this position group is going to be kind of easy to dissect. And for one very interesting reason, it's going to be quite a fluid topic to talk about because of a backup player, believe it or not. And we're going to talk about the quarterback. So, Scott, Andy Dalton isn't in danger of losing his job, obviously, and he's coming off a very good 2015 season, a pretty good 2016 season based on all of the attrition that happened around him, both in the coaching ranks and personnel. I'm a little worried about his safety in 2017. Based on the offensive line the Bengals are planning to trot out in front of him. But your thoughts on Dalton just quickly. I mean, obviously the job's his. Your thoughts on Dalton in terms of from 2015 to 2016, what he had to deal with. Is your confidence shaken at all just because he didn't look exactly like the same guy we saw that was MVP-like in 2015?
No, I mean, like you said, he is who we thought he was, to kill Dennis Green's quote. The whole idea, he had a great 2015, but then again, that really wasn't your typical Dalton year either. I think you could argue 2015 was a little better than normal. 2016 was a little worse, but obviously last year they didn't have the same level of blocking. Bowling was hurt. Andre Smith was gone. They were struggling through the Winston Oboye Fisher thing. They obviously didn't have Tyler Eifert for much of the year. They lost AJ Green at the end of the season. Obviously Marvin Jones was gone. You could argue Mohamed Sanu. And then you have your pass catching running back Giovanni Bernard out for part of the year. So I think last year was probably down quite a bit. And if you look at the first year in Hugh Jackson's offense, Dalton kind of struggled also. So he had a subpar year, MVP caliber year, subpar year. So I think he's kind of somewhere in the middle. And, his passes seem to be decent. He seems to be, the big knock on him early was he couldn't get the deep passes. He kept overthrowing AJ Green when he was wide open or underthrowing him. And then AJ Green would have to slow down and the coverage would catch up to him. And he'd have to make these amazing catches because he couldn't hit him in stride. And even a couple years ago when Green got hurt in camp, it was because Dalton overthrew him and he tried to stretch for a ball and landed kind of awkward. But anyway, his throws can be better. His poise in the pocket, while not great, is, decent. I think he's a decent, solid, guy. You give him blocking, you give him decent receivers. He is who he is, and you kind of hope, we've kind of hit on it, the receivers and blocking you would hope would be better this year than what it looks like right now, but I don't think he's a liability. And like you said, I think he's a starter. There's no question about it on this team. Going forward, he is the starter. There is no competition.
Yeah, and just to echo some of your sentiments, and it's a little bit unfair to compare his great season from 2015 to 2016 because he missed 3 regular season games, and then obviously basically the better part of 4 regular season games, and then obviously the playoff game. Second, we're talking 2016, second most passing yards in a season, 4,206. Second highest yards per completion, I believe it's 7.5. Second highest passing yards per game, 262.9. A little low on the touchdowns at 18, unfortunately, but very low on the interception scale. Second lowest of his career, only to 2015 when he missed those basically 4 games with only 8 interceptions, and his second best rating of the year, of his career, 91.8. So a lot of good things to be taken from such a bad team performance last year in terms of Andy Dalton's play. I think the poise thing is really interesting there, Scott, and I agree with you. I saw a little bit of, as the season wore on, I saw a little bit more of happy feet than I had seen from Dalton, but I do think that is obviously because he had the second most sacks of his career with 41. That plays a big part of it, as well as a new offensive coordinator and a rookie offensive coordinator kind of finding his way through things. So that's, it is what it is. Unfortunately, it just wasn't as flashy as we saw in 2015, but it was more efficient. And Dalton, for the most part, took care of the football, which is saying quite a lot when you're sacked 41 times. Now the interesting part is AJ McCarron and Jeff Driscoll. So for the first time in a while, the Bengals kept 3 quarterbacks on the active roster, Scott. And Jeff Driscoll, who was, I believe, with the 49ers, they let him go with around final cuts. The Bengals picked him up and kept him on their final roster throughout the year, along with AJ McCarron. Kind of interesting because the Bengals they usually keep 2 quarterbacks. Some people thought that was kind of a prelude to a trade. There's more offseason rumblings with McCarron being traded this season. I don't want to beat a dead horse because we've talked about McCarron being traded on this program quite a bit as recent as last week. So just your thoughts at backup quarterback. I think the Bengals should get what they can for AJ McCarron this year, just because it seems like they're going all in on the NFL draft. If they can get a decent pick for a guy that's not going to play for them, barring a catastrophic injury to Dalton, I think you do it. What do you think?
Yeah, on the McCarron thing, I totally agree because and part of the reason is they've made comments about how they want to re-sign McCarron, they want to keep him. There is no way that's happening. First off, he wants to be a starter. I mean, most people do. They at least want that chance. He's not going to get that here. And secondly, we've seen what backups can bring as far as free agent salaries. We saw what Osweiler got, guys like Glennon, anyone who is a backup quarterback who seems to have any sort of ability to take a snap from under center is going to get money. And someone's going to give him more than Mike Brown would give him to be a backup, which means he's gone. As soon as he's done, as soon as his rookie deal's done, he's out of here. So that being said, you want to get something for him. And if you let him go, depending on what he signs for, you might get a 3rd, 4th, 5th round compensation pick. We've already hit on how horrible those have been. So if it comes to trade him now, get a 1st or a 2nd, or wait a year and get a 4th round pick at the end of the 4th round, I'd rather have a high 2nd round pick today than a late 4th round pick in a couple years. So that being said, I think they absolutely have to trade him. And another one argument is, well, you want to have a good backup quarterback in the NFL because you can't win. If it's a quarterback league and your starter goes down, that I agree with. But I'd also throw this caveat out that it's very difficult to win with a backup quarterback. I mean, granted, a good one's better than a bad one. But I think if Dalton goes down, we could safely say the season's a wash. They're not going to go to the playoff, win any playoff games. We saw when McCarron went in the year where they had a great year. I think they went 2-2 and made the playoffs 2-3 with him. So yeah, it wasn't 0-5, but it wasn't like he was exactly going to carry the team anywhere. So I think at that point, you want to have a good backup, but I don't think it's absolutely essential. Only because you're without the starter, you're not really going to have a great season anyway. Mm-hmm. So get what you can for him, and if you get a high enough pick, you can always draft another backup quarterback or sign. And then you mentioned the Driscoll thing. You have to assume that if they're holding him on the active roster all year, or on the 53-man, it's because they don't want to expose him to being picked up by someone else if they left him on the practice squad. So they've got to see something in him. And the fact they did that all season long, you would think at some point they would have, put him on if they're, okay, guys, this isn't working out, we'll put him on the practice squad, see what happens. But the fact they never did that makes you think, they have to see something in him. It would be absurd to have 3 quarterbacks again this year. So I think one of them's gone. Either they're going to release Driscoll, or if they saw enough that this is our guy, then yeah, you have to hope McCarron's going to get traded. But I think the problem is the closer you get to the draft, the less likely that's going to be, because probably the teams that need a quarterback are going to do what they need to do. And then once the draft comes, they're going to draft one. And so at that point, your trade market is probably going to be dwindled unless you get a team that desperately needs one that just didn't get one in the draft.
Yeah, that's where I agree and disagree with you. I think I do think that the fact that more time passed, the start of free agency, teams are they get in this mode where it's like, we got to sign this guy, we got to get this guy, we got to do. And the more time that passes, things cool off, and then teams are less likely to really do something where it's more of a trigger-happy type of move. I do think – so in that respect, I agree with you. But I do think if, as you get to the draft, that kind of frenzy picks up again. Teams are willing to kind of do some things. And then if someone leapfrogs another team that wants a quarterback, they didn't get it. We've seen the Bengals make player trades in the early years of Marvin Lewis, before Delta O'Neal, Corey Dillon, that sort of thing. So it's not impossible to think that a team that misses out on a quarterback in the draft could go after McCarron. My question is, Scott, and I don't know the answer to this, and I don't know if you do either. But number one, what's his actual value to a team in terms of what they would give up, and what teams out there really would give up quite a bit for him based on a 5-game sample, and what they need. So you have the Browns. The Bengals aren't going to trade him to the Browns for sure. You have the 49ers. You have the Bears, the Jets.
Maybe the Texans right now.
The Texans, okay.
And the Broncos, depending on what happens with Romo.
Romo, yep.
I'm sure there's someone else who's not coming to mind.
Yeah, I don't know.
Possibly Cardinals. I think Palmer's coming back, but he's probably on his last year, so they're probably looking at someone beyond him.
Yeah. Are we as fans, are we overvaluing McCarron's value to other teams, or?
I think if we're saying a first-round pick, we probably are. But I don't think a second-round pick is unreasonable, just because if you look at some of the other trades that have happened for backup quarterbacks like Kevin Kolb or guys like Matt Flynn, some of these other players who really are in a similar situation. They were medium to low picks. They played very sparingly behind an established starter. And then when they left their team that drafted them, they got what seemed to be much more than they should have gotten for their team. So I think that being said, I think a second-round pick is not unreasonable, especially since you do have a draft where no one seems to think there's a clear number one guy. I mean, you have guys like Trubisky, who I guess he has the physical tools. He'd never seemed to look like a guy when you watch him play that seems to know what he's doing with the ball. Deshaun Watson, there's knocks on him. There's not a Andrew Luck kind of a guy or Jameis Winston out there that people are like, this is the guy we're drafting. So that being said, if you're a team that needs a quarterback, you might look at these guys and say, okay, Watson's decent, but he may just, be another EJ Manuel as a first-round pick, but only just because. And you may look at the other guys and say, yeah, they're nice projects, but, they're a couple years out from ever doing anything for us. We want a guy now. That could be McCarron. So I think there's a market for him. And I think a second's reasonable. It just depends on. Now, that being said, I don't know if Mike Brown would give him away for a second. He might want a first. I know he kind of played hardball with Carson Palmer, and that worked out.
Yeah.
So you never know.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really the only other possibility for a trade with the Bengals if they don't strike one this offseason is, maybe there's a competitive team that loses their starting quarterback to injury, and they want to make that playoff push, and they may be desperate, and they may mortgage, future picks. That doesn't help the Bengals out necessarily in 2017, but they may be able to mortgage some future picks. The Bengals gets a high pick, maybe a little higher than what they may have been offered so far this offseason for him, and that's where they go. We'll see. This McCarron thing is a lingering issue. Luckily, it's not something where a lot of people are necessarily calling for McCarron to start over Dalton. It's more, we've got a pretty good quarterback. We've got another pretty decent one who's a backup. Let's see what we can get for him, and that's kind of been the attitude. So you can tell us your thoughts, listeners, about AJ McCarron, about what the Bengals are doing in free agency, and even about what Nate Lowry said earlier in the show. We've talked about a lot of stuff. We're going to get out of here in just a few minutes. You can get in touch with us via Twitter at BengalsOBI. Send your questions there. You can also send questions via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. You can also download all of our material via iTunes or on our channels on YouTube and SoundCloud, and all of our material is also available on CincyJungle.com, as well as a plethora of news, free agency news, on what the team has been doing so far in free agency, or not. We keep joking, or not doing. But keep it to Cincy Jungle, and keep tuning into the Orange and Black Insider for some updates here.